The next session is about optimizing brand spends for incrementality by Satish Kadu for Via Optima. Can we have a round of applause for him?
This is Satish. I run Via Optima. We are a digital media optimization company that optimizes brand marketing spends for incrementality or brand marketing spends for business outcomes. Traditionally, we look at performance marketing from the lens of CPA, ROAS, conversions and stuff, and brand marketing from the lens of reach, frequency, visibility. But both of these would be a waste of money if they are not driving true incrementality. If performance isn't adding to net growth, or brand marketing is only driving visibility and not net growth, then both of that is ultimately a waste of money. And so we're going to talk about that today in this presentation. Facing any issues? Okay. So that's my topic, optimizing brand spends for incrementality. I don't see it here, by the way. Doesn't appear here. Okay. I'm going to start with 3 real stories of 3 brands that we were associated with in the last couple of years as their consultant / auditor, auditing their campaigns that they had invited us to look into. Let me just get started nevertheless. So, care brand, one of the very well-known ones, one of the fast-growing. And the founder called me and she was like, look, we've already spent a few crore rupees, and they were working with some agency. And she said, my campaign media metrics are looking great. My VTRs are great. I'm seeing 60% VTR on my brand campaign. And she was running it on YouTube and OTTs. And from a media standpoint, the CPMs are great. It looks very efficient. The reach is very efficient. But guess what? Half of the budget is over and I'm not seeing any needle moving in terms of no new traffic coming to the website. Organic traffic hasn't gone up. Brand traffic isn't there either. The traffic that's coming up on the website, even the one that's coming, has extremely poor bounce rate. And so it's extremely high bounce rate. And she was like, what's going on? And then they had paused that campaign midway. When we audited this campaign, we saw that 60% of the spend had gone in passive view media. 60% of the spend basically were delivered across, just a minute. Yeah. 60% of the spend got delivered across audio, music, religion and belief channels, primarily on mobile, where people typically keep the phone here and they are just in a listening mode. And since the ads were primarily running on skippable format, nobody was seeing that, therefore nobody was skipping that. Therefore the VTRs were artificially inflated. When we looked at the VTRs on active media, which are basically channels where you are likely to be glued to the screen, the VTRs were normal. They were around 30%, 25% VTR. To make matters worse, that entire traffic, the video viewer pool, was further retargeted, which was anyways a passive video viewer pool, and that further created the double whammy in terms of media wastage. And that's one of the takeaways, which is views or VTR doesn't mean attention. The second story is of a fairly well-known, one of the leading e-commerce marketplaces in India. And for the first time, they were opening up to men. The brand was fairly well-known to women as an audience, and therefore their awareness baselines, consideration baselines were pretty good with women. Whereas men was the first time that they were even opening up to, and therefore men awareness levels were low. When we ran this brand campaign, it delivered extremely high relative brand lift in terms of awareness for men, whereas women hardly saw fairly limited incremental relative brand lift. So if we were to measure this campaign success only based on relative brand lift, then we would say, look, targeting men actually worked very well. But when we looked at the conversion lift, which is what was the net incrementality that ultimately got delivered in terms of sales and transactions from the campaigns, the brand campaigns that were targeted, it was women that scored fairly high. And the brand lift naturally scored very well in terms of purchase intent, favorability. The point I'm making here is that brand lift doesn't necessarily translate into conversion lift either. Often they may be negatively correlated because underlying cohorts of audiences And even the creatives may not necessarily, one that aligns for brand lift may not be the one that aligns with conversion lift. The third story is for one of the large fintech brands in the country, where they were running a performance campaign for a long while, and the brand had already reached a pretty high level of consideration baselines. The brand had almost become one of the leadership brands in their category. And then one fine morning, they decided to pause their performance campaigns for whatever reasons. And the performance campaigns remained paused for the next 30 days, or 3 weeks at least. And guess what? There was no impact in terms of actual business coming down. The install volume didn't come down. Nothing really happened. Nothing came down. And that was basically because the brand had already attained a certain degree of organic growth, which performance was just eating into, organic poaching. And therefore, performance necessarily doesn't mean incrementality either. Or attribution doesn't mean incrementality either. And so, one thing that marketers we need to be really careful about is our supposedly best performing channel may not be the one that's actually really creating any meaningful incremental demand. Then there is this favorite topic in the ad tech world about fraud, and obviously, why should it not be? I mean, there is a lot of money that gets wasted on fraud, but often, while fraud is something that people get, it gets detected, it gets acted upon, it's feared, but the big gorilla in the room is incrementality. 30 to 60% of the budget is merely wasted because it's not driving any net incrementality. And that's a much bigger elephant in the room than fraud itself, often ignored, often celebrated, because we tend to think that, hey, my campaign is working and it's doing very efficiently, but actually it's not driving any incrementality. And that's because most marketing spend is optimized for efficiency. Often, when we engage with brands for the first time, or that's their first ever digital brand campaign, there is a huge emphasis on CPMs, and people are like, hey, why are my CPMs so high? And why actually my CPM should be low. But when you are optimizing for that, you are almost invariably not optimizing for the outcomes. The incremental CPMs for building high frequencies are way higher than the CPMs that you see for building your 1+ reach. And so all of that is systemic to how we run campaigns traditionally as an industry, because the campaigns are optimized for efficiency and not for growth. The other thing that we saw was, you're running your brand campaign on a media that's highly contested for performance optimization simultaneously. Basically, the likes of Google, Meta, and other platforms. And we do use them. We work with them heavily. But when you buy media for branding on those campaigns, there is also one possible phenomena that's happening, that your highest intent audience that you want to target through branding is probably getting auctioned out by performance. Because the performance media in real time could be bidding 10 times higher CPMs effectively than your brand campaigns. And if you're only optimizing for CPMs, you're invariably going to get auctioned out. The third thing is attention, which I kind of already spoke about. Often, when you show up on environments that are by design passive views, you will see artificially inflated VTRs that will make you very happy that your media metrics are doing great, but probably they are not doing any justice to your brand spends. And this is the comfort zone of performance on the other side. Hey, my performance campaigns are doing well. Our budgets are already too small. That's why I don't want to do branding or brand performance, or attribution looks great. All of these are the blind spots that the marketer needs to be really aware of. And metrics do lie. Like we discussed, high VTRs doesn't necessarily mean attention. High CTR doesn't mean intent. High CTR could also mean accidental clicks, if not fraud. And high lift doesn't mean impact either. A relative lift that is 300% on an extremely small baseline doesn't move the needle. And so all of these really need to be seen from the lens of incrementality. I'm keeping a watch on my time, on the time here. I think I'll go another 2 minutes. Then there is another problem, which is the oversimplified analysis. There is this classic problem in maths, which is also seen across industries, which is Simpson's paradox. When you look at any data that's highly multidimensional by design, and marketing by design is multidimensional because you're dealing with creative, audiences, geo, placements where you're buying ads, and so on and so forth. There are like 20 plus parameters like that. When you take that 20-dimensional data through a simple pivot table and look at a one-dimensional insight, often it's possible that the insight is flipped. That's due to a mathematical challenge called Simpson's paradox. This happened with one of our clients, which is one of the leading QSR brands in the world, where a simplified analysis showed that shakes as a creative would deliver better VTR, although the difference is not too high, but that mattered for the brand. But truly, when you looked deeper, analyzing for Simpson's paradox, it was actually burgers that was consistently outperforming shakes on VTR across all granular dimension. And this is just a statistical problem, which is Simpson's paradox, which needs to be addressed for. Moving further on, reach is easy, memory is expensive. One plus reach may hardly drive any impact when you're doing a brand or a brand performance campaign. But as you can see here, as you go higher frequencies, and obviously there is an optima at some point, there is an optimal frequency. But as you go and build higher frequencies with the right attention, the conversion of at higher frequency cohorts are much higher than conversions at lower frequencies. All of these can be analyzed, and this needs to be something that needs to be really looked at when you're running a brand performance campaign. This is one of that fintech brands I was referring to, a consistent high active media buying in context, targeting people who are looking at SIPs and financial planning and all of that. Gradually over a period of 6 to 9 months, lifted the consideration baseline for the brand, which is on the x-axis here. And that drove 3 to 5 times lift in terms of performance across all their channels. And that's really the power of brand performance, which is branding driving performance. Just another 1 minute. So quickly summarizing the 6 rules for incrementality: go where performance isn't competing with branding. Like look at media touch points where you're not heavily buying into where performance media is already outbidding you. Target switchers first, as opposed to targeting those who are absolutely at the bottom of the funnel, which are anyways most likely going to convert for you, especially if they are brand aware and brand loyal. Focus on frequency before reach alone. And of course, it depends on who you are targeting, but there has to be a strong focus on frequency-based reach buildup. Measure incremental impact. Optimize in flight. That's the beauty of digital. You don't no more need to do post-campaign eval. You can actually do optimization in campaign. And ultimately, branding compounds and performance does reset if it's overdone. These are some of the GenAI-powered engines that we have built at Optima that's ultimately geared towards driving incrementality. Each of them works towards measurement, discovery, targeting, or optimization. And this is one of the case studies. This is one of the leading femtech brands in the country that's now competing with Stay Free and Whisper. And over the last 6-9 months of consistent incrementality-led effort has created a whole new baseline for this brand, which sustained even after the brand blast campaign got over and the brand sustenance was at a fairly nominal mode. And that's really the beauty of brand performance, which is branding driving sustainable business growth. That's pretty much it. We have a bot here that you can basically ask about incrementality. And this is what I want to leave you guys with, which is, are you really optimizing for attribution or are you optimizing for growth? That's the question I want to leave you with. That's it, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think it was a fantastic presentation. I think it's a conversation that most marketers, shy away from. So firstly, thank you.
Thank you.
Secondly, I'd love to see more about how have you shown incrementality or done the work for any brands and how have they benefited?
Yeah, I heard the first part. What is the second part of the question?
Which is can you elucidate with an example where you've actually brought whatever theory that you just presented to life for a brand?
Yes. So across the board, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, as digital became mainstream for branding media as a branding media, and we use programmatic in the back end, but we also use non-programmatic media too as required. So what we do is we leverage GeoLift studies on one hand, where you are pre-identifying matched markets. So if you're doing Delhi, then which is the other matching market for the brand where you do control and exposed? It doesn't always work that way very well because you are constantly changing the variables nevertheless. So better framework is conversion lift study. In conversion lift study, you are deliberately holding up certain part of the audience and you're exposing other part of the audience in the same city. And then you're looking at what led to this audience post and during the brand campaign in terms of their behavior down funnel. In terms of how was their response on brand lift studies, which itself is not a ultimate barometer any which way. How did it translate into search lift? How did it translate into their visits, quality of the visits, and further down conversion rate, including in-store visits or offline store visits as well. All of that, thanks to data and measurability, can be plugged through the models where you are modeling for incrementality. And the beauty of digital is that you can do all of that in campaign and continuing to optimize it, which means you are not taking the plan as a sacrosanct holy cow, sacred cow all through, but you are optimizing the plan itself.
Sounds good. May I request you to also show the first 3 principles of incrementality?
This one?
Yes.
Cool.
Super. No, thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Anyone else? Yeah.
So, for example, for a brand, let's say typically FMCG kind of brand, where maybe they are working on a larger format of creative, correct? And there the quartile Q1, Q4 is also very important. How about a category where CVTR is more toward the 30 seconder of the duration, correct? And if the Q4, let's say 60 seconder creative, giving let's say 80% of the viewability, is that matching to engagement as per your parameter?
Yeah. So let me qualify what I mentioned about VTR. It doesn't necessarily mean attention. If we isolate for these confounding variables, such as passive views versus active views. So what I mean by that is, if you have to break down that VTR across the type of channels that VTR came through, and if you know that the channels that the VTR came through showed extremely high VTR on passive view oriented channels, whereas the VTR was far lower on channels that you consider to be active view, then you have to account for that. Now within that, on the other hand, if you are saying, look, I have isolated that effect, now I'm only looking at channels that I can truly say are by and large active views. Within that, if my VTR is much higher for creative 1 over creative 2, then it's truly that the creative 1 is responding better. The point I was making was isolate for all of these confounding variables.
That's a creative A/B testing point you spoke about. Imagine in the case of OTTs, right? For example, they are saying 60-second creative on a non-skip. How will you rate those kind of format, right? Because that metrics is
exactly. Then that VTR is an absolute vanity metric. Absolutely.
And other than that, when you spoke about the Simpsons paradox, would love to see more detailing how exactly it correlated on that part.
Yeah.
Because it is more about when you are seeing a data in isolation and then you are merging it and then you are seeing how exactly it is changing.
Yeah.
Would like to show more, because as of now the variation which was shown on the Burger King part was not that much apt.
Yeah.
Just a point.
Yeah. So in fact, I had a slide which I couldn't do it due to paucity of time, but that slide had Tendulkar and Kohli, their scores in ODI and test matches. They were hypothetical numbers though, because the point was to prove that Simpson's paradox, can exist. And so on those deliberately illustrative numbers, Kohli had better run rate both in ODI and test matches, but the overall average for Tendulkar turned out to be higher than Kohli's, which is paradoxical, that if Kohli has a better average, both in test and ODI, you expect his overall average to be better too. And that's Simpson's paradox, because there is a multiplier involved of the number of test matches played and the number of ODI played. And that's the gimmick of math. That's the challenge with math. When we do a simple pivot table, we could be easily fooled. One of our clients, which was into real money gaming, over-promoted their mobile app, thinking that mobile app was outperforming desktop. And back then, I think it was mobile web, sorry, not app, mobile web and app, desktop. Only to realize a month later, business actually came down because the original analysis that showed that mobile web outperformed desktop was fraught with Simpson's paradox.
A simple example for that can be a view frequency, right? From a different platform, if you do a normal average, that number will be wrong. But if you do a weighted average...
I'm talking about weighted average only. That's the beauty of Simpson's paradox. The weighted average itself is misleading. And we can, I'll connect with you offline and show you. And this happens in every industry. A classic example is there on Wikipedia about surgeries. You can probably check out on that. Cool. Thank you, guys. Thanks a lot.
Paying attention, but I'll check it my way because it's trivia time again. Are you guys ready with your hands? Okay. Does high VTR necessarily mean high attention? Why? Wow. Guys, it was about raising hand and answering.
No, we raised and no. We said, we asked the question.
Okay. To be honest, Wyatt placed their hand first. And guys, please raise it first. No, why? Why is it a no? I am.
We just discussed this point.
Why the answer is no?
Because it can be deceiving. No, for example, higher VTR on a longer creative. Just now we discussed about it, right? It doesn't mean that people have paid attention to that creative. So it should not be on an engagement side.
Okay, great. Okay, I'll call another colleague of mine. Why don't you come here, Hardik, and see if I am, picking the right team so that we have double checks. Okay, time for the next question and the last question for this trivia. Is brand lift a great measure of the success of the brand campaign? You can't do that, white team. Okay, white team again, but you can't keep lifting like that and, answer. Okay. Who did that? Okay, being fair, we will give it to, what color is that? Yellow team. What's the answer?
It's conversion lift.
Okay. Satish has to validate this.